Hello friends, welcome to Faithful to the Scriptures. Today we're going to talk about what is unique about each one of the four Gospels that we have. Our guest today is Dr. Tom Shepard. He is Professor of New Testament Interpretation at Andrews University. So I invite you to take your Bible, your notebook, and come to this table so that we can study together this important topic. Tom, welcome again to this program.
Thank you.
We're very glad to have you here. We're going to continue to talk about the Gospels.
Yeah.
We have noticed that we noticed that the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very, very similar.
Yes.
What is the relationship between them?
Well,
who is the first one, and did any one of them copy from the other?
Yeah. Well, these Gospels are called Synoptic Gospels. That word means to see together.
Okay.
And they have very much the same wording. They have very much the same order of the life of Jesus, the story of Jesus, and they just seem to have a lot in common. Now, a lot of people will say, well, then maybe one of them was before the others, and they were copying from one another. Some people, that worries them. They say, why would an apostle like Matthew copy from Mark? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe someday we'll get a chance if that's what happened. Mm-hmm. I can imagine us sitting in heaven and talking to them, and they'll all laugh at what we're talking about and how we think about these things. But it has really been a challenging problem for scholars for hundreds of years, actually, thinking about this issue. Now, most scholars think that the Gospel of Mark was written first. Its Greek is not as smooth as the Greek of Matthew or Luke. It's shorter, and they think that it's just not as refined, seems a little rougher. And so they think that maybe this gospel was the first one written, and then the other two depended on it for some information. And then maybe they copied things and they put things in a similar order. There's a number of reasons why scholars go down this path. We actually have two major positions that are taken on the it's called the synoptic problem of which of these was written first. The one is called the two-source hypothesis. We have a slide that you'll see on the screen. For the two-source hypothesis, you have Mark and a hypothetical document called Q, source of the sayings of Jesus, and that you'll see lines going down to Matthew and Luke, indicating that Matthew and Luke did not use each other, but that Matthew used Mark and Matthew used Q, and Luke used Mark and Luke used Q, but it seemed as though Matthew and Luke used Q in different ways.
Now, we have mentioned Q already, so if person who is seeing this program can go to that program and see what is Q.
Right. So the other way is sometimes by the scholars who favor it called the two-gospel hypothesis instead of the two-source hypothesis. And they believe that Matthew was written first, Luke used Matthew, then Mark was written last, and Mark used both Matthew and Luke. This actually agrees with some of the testimony of people from the early church saying that the Gospels that had the genealogies of Jesus, Matthew and Luke, were actually written first. There's problems with that, probably more difficulties for that position because of, if you were writing a Gospel like Mark and you left out the Sermon on the Mount, or you left out the parable of the prodigal son or the Good Samaritan. I mean, really, would you leave that out of your gospel? If I was copying somebody, I don't think I would.
Yes.
So that creates a certain problem for this. The relationship between these gospels, though, when you sit down and you put the Greek right next to each other of a passage and everything, the wording varies just a little here and there, just a little here and there.
It's very similar.
Yeah, it's very similar, but it's so complex. The difference is so that, why did he change this word and why did he move this one? Like in the Gospel of Matthew, when it talks about the sower, there's this typical kind of pattern where it goes that it will produce 100, 60, or 30-fold.
Yes.
Well, Matthew has it one way and Mark has it the other direction. And you'd wonder, well, what reason would there be if you were copying? Why in the world would you change that? That's quite a conundrum.
Yes.
So actually, what I think is a better answer is that the disciples memorized the sayings of Jesus, the wording of Jesus. Maybe they even had a pattern of how they told the story and they put it in the same kind of order. And that helps to explain some of these small little differences. I will admit, though, it's a challenging problem. It's not that our salvation depends upon knowing the answer to this, but knowing the answer does make some difference for interpretation. So it's not a ho-hum, go to sleep kind of a question. It's actually one that has important issues, and we should study it carefully so that we can come to a solution. So there's those different solutions that we've suggested.
Tom, let's talk now about the Gospel of Matthew. This is the first one in the list of the Gospels. What is its message? What is the peculiar message of Matthew and its structure?
Well, very much like the epistles of Paul. When you read the epistles of Paul, he starts off with, he describes who he is, who he's writing to, and then he gives his thanksgiving. And a lot of people look at those thanksgivings or praises to God and they say, oh, let's get to the real theology.
Yes.
But actually what Paul does in the thanksgiving or the prayer for the people, he presents the primary and main themes that he's going to talk about throughout the letter. So it's really good to read that introduction, that first part.
Yes.
The same is true of the Gospels.
Okay.
So you start off reading the Gospel of Matthew, and where does he begin? He begins with a genealogy of Jesus. This genealogy of Jesus starts with let's just open it up and read just a little bit of what he says. Okay, Matthew chapter 1, and once we get past the very beginning words, this is what the apostle will say to us. He says, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Then he starts with Abraham was the father of Isaac, and he goes through that, and he comes down to David, and he talks about that, and then he comes to the deportation to Babylon, and eventually he comes to Jesus. And he stresses the importance of the number 14. There are 14 generations here, 14 generations here, 14 generations. If you count them, it's a little funny math. You have to look at it very carefully. But the reason he probably focuses on the number 14 is he wants to stress the connection with David, because the name David in the letters in Hebrew all add up to the number 14.
Okay,
right?
okay.
So there's two things in particular that Matthew stresses as he begins his gospel. He focuses on this connection to David and to the fulfillment of prophecy. So through the book, he's going to make this emphasis, this happened to fulfill the prophecy. Jesus is the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Old Testament.
So in a sense, what Matthew wants us to remember is that God has been faithful to his promises, and that has been come in Jesus Christ.
Yes, and that Jesus is this royal king of David. In the story of at the beginning story of his birth, it's the wise men who come from the east to see the king, who is the one who's born king of the Jews. When he presents Jesus, however, the story of Jesus is kind of focused around, this whole biography of Jesus is focused around 5 great sermons of Jesus.
Okay.
These are the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5-7, the missionary discourse in Matthew 10 when he sends the disciples out as missionaries, the parables, a grouping of parables that he gives in Matthew 13, his discourse on church relationships within the community of faith in Matthew 18, and then an eschatological discourse that is in Matthew 24 and 25. You might even be able to include Matthew 23 there. And when he comes to the conclusion of these great discourses, he'll say, after Jesus finished this, then he went there. So some people think that might kind of tie Jesus to like the 5 books of Moses. So Jesus is the new David, Jesus is the son of Abraham, Jesus is the new Moses, and he's Emmanuel, who will be with you always, even to the end of the age.
So Jesus is almost every important character of the Old Testament.
And where Israel failed to fulfill the will of God, Jesus succeeds. The temptations of Jesus in chapter 4 of Matthew. He retraces the steps of these people, and he succeeds where they fail. The Gospel of Matthew became the favorite gospel of the early church. And it's not that hard to see why, because he has these wonderful, combinations of the sayings of Jesus in great sermons that are so memorable. I mean, who can forget the Sermon on the Mount?
Yes.
I mean, it cuts like a knife,
yes.
right at the heart, and
yes.
it has all these wonderful instructions on what you're supposed to do in your life. Mm-hmm. And so that has helped the church through a long time. So the book of Matthew is just a fantastic book. 28 chapters, covering from Jesus' birth all the way to his resurrection and return, giving us the Great Commission that still guides us today as we carry the gospel to all the world.
And Tom, now, what about the Gospel of Mark? I know that this is a very important gospel for you. You have studied this gospel a lot.
My dissertation was in the Gospel of Mark, and I'm teaching it to our students at the seminary. It's a joy. It's a beautiful gospel.
So what do you think is its message, its peculiarity?
The Gospel of Mark easily divides into two halves. And the first half goes from chapter 1 to chapter 8, and right up almost to the end of chapter 8, and then from that point to the end of the book in chapter 16. It's the shortest of the Gospels. It only has 16 chapters. But there are two questions that could be used to describe the whole outline of the Gospel of Mark. The first question is, who is Jesus? And the second question is, where is he going? Both questions, in a way, are actually introduced at the very beginning of the book. Because when you read, if you take your Bible and you open to the Gospel of Mark, you see that it starts off the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, "Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, who shall prepare thy way. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight." So it talks about the way of the Lord, and that's the path that Jesus will follow. So where is he going? So what's the answer to these two questions? Well, who is Jesus? Right from the beginning of the book, you hear, I mean, the reader knows from the beginning he's the Christ, he's the Son of God.
The voice announces
The voice announces it at his baptism.
Yes.
Interestingly, it says, "You are my beloved Son." So it's like a voice to Jesus, saying, "You are my beloved Son." So you know right from the very beginning who he is.
Yeah.
But interestingly, people in the book, they have trouble figuring out who he is.
Even the disciples, I guess.
Yeah, the disciples. The demons know who he is, but then he tells them to be quiet. So there's this secrecy kind of thing that runs through the book, all the way through the book. And he's like, shh, don't say. Now, historically, we can say there was good reason for that, because if you claim to be a Messiah, that could be taken as a kingly kind of a thing, a kingly title, and the Romans wouldn't like that too well. And of course, Jesus is crucified as the King of the Jews. So Jesus tamping down the popular excitement made sense historically. But theologically, in the book of Mark, there's this theme always running of revelation and secrecy, revelation and secrecy. And the secret is about who he is, but what is revealed is his power and what he's able to do. And it's as though you can't hide it. You can't keep it hidden. It has to come out. In the beginning, in the very introduction, just like in the book of Matthew, we said that you have, the beginning is where you find where the things are headed. The beginning presents Jesus as this character who is both strong in some ways, all the titles. He's the Christ, he's the Lord, he's the Son, the beloved Son. There's all kinds of wonderful, strong titles. But then there are certain sort of almost signs of weakness in a way. He's baptized by John. He doesn't baptize John, he's baptized by John. The Holy Spirit, it says, cast him out into the desert. Almost like, well, that's the word that's usually used for casting out demons.
Yes.
Not saying Jesus is a demon,
of course.
But the Holy Spirit is, directing him. The devil tempts him, and then angels come and minister to him. That makes you you have question marks as to what's going to happen to this person. He's very strong, but there seems to be weakness. Well, that's where you come up to the middle of the book, and the disciples confess him. He says, "Who do men say that I am? And who do you say I am?" That very personal appeal.
Yes.
Who do you say I am? And they say, "You're the Messiah." Once they say that, he starts to tell them where he's going. Where he's going is the cross. And if you want to be his disciple, you have to take up the cross
and follow him.
And of course, when you get to the cross, there's this interesting parallel. We don't have time to explain it, but there's an interesting parallel between the baptism scene and the cross. The cross is actually his baptism in blood.
Yes.
But there, of course, he is weak. He feels rejected by God. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? So these two halves of the gospel get together. Now, at the very end of the gospel, you have this interesting thing where the women run away and they don't tell anybody because they're scared. Mm-hmm. And that's a terrible way to end a story.
Yes.
And so what happens is the reader reads that and says, you can't end the gospel like that. That's not the way to end the gospel. Somebody has to tell.
Yes.
And of course, what's happening is the gospel writer Mark is appealing to you and to me and saying, yes, somebody must tell, and that's you. You must go and tell the gospel. I love the Gospel of Mark.
Now we come to the Gospel of Luke.
Yes.
He writes a long gospel.
It's the longest of the four.
Yes.
It's 24 chapters, and it's actually it's a two-part book because it's Luke and then it's Acts.
Yes.
And he's writing to the same man, and so his themes and his goals are to cross two books.
Correct.
Luke wrote about 25% by volume of the New Testament. So there's a lot.
It's a very important theologian then for the
theologian,
New Testament.
Yes.
So what is the message of Luke? What is the unique characteristics?
Okay, so like we said for the other Gospels, we said you go to the beginning of the Gospel and there you see the themes and where they're headed. Okay, Luke starts with the birth story of Jesus. He doesn't start with a genealogy like Matthew does. He starts with the birth story of Jesus. And though Luke is a Gentile, and writing to a Gentile, Theophilus, yet he really ties this in to the covenantal concepts of the people of Israel.
Yes.
And instead of, like Matthew has all this fulfillment of Scripture that's happened to fulfill it, Luke is almost like songs. People are filled with the Spirit of God and they go into poetry or into music.
Yes, we have the song of Mary, the song of
Zechariah. Elizabeth, there's all these things that they're kind of singing almost, the story. And it all roots back into Old Testament story. There's a wonderful theme about the temple. The book of Luke starts in the temple, and the book of Luke ends in the temple. Zechariah's in the temple when he gets the message that he's going to have a son. He and his wife are going to have a baby. And after Jesus returns to heaven, the disciples return praising God. And where did they go? They're in the temple. And that's not where it ends. If you get over to the book of Acts, they continue to the whole thing with the temple, And so it's really quite interesting. There is an inaugural sermon of Jesus, very important, in Luke chapter 4, where he goes, as it is his custom on the Sabbath day, he goes into the synagogue in his hometown. And there he quotes from Isaiah. And he quotes this beautiful message about healing, about sight to the blind, about good news being preached to the poor. And that becomes like the outline of where the rest of the book of Luke is going to go. You get a similar thing happening in the book of Acts chapter 1, where Jesus tells his disciples they're going to be his missionaries to Judea, and to Jerusalem, to Judea, to Samaria, to the ends of the earth. And that's how the mission expands. So this inaugural sermon in Luke chapter 4 is very important for predicting where Jesus is headed with his mission. You come to, you go on further into the story of Jesus, and you come in Luke to Luke chapter 9, which is kind of this turning point that happens. And it says that Jesus sets his face to go to Jerusalem. Now we're only in Luke chapter 9, and the book is 24 chapters long. So there's a long journey that he's going to take.
It seems like, and we know because of the cross, so it's like a cross is casting a long shadow in the ministry of Jesus.
Yeah, and so he's headed that way. It says he sets his face to go that way, and there's the transfiguration scene, and they talk to him about his departure that will happen in Jerusalem. And he heads on towards this, and we have more parables. Luke has things that other Gospels don't have. We have the parables in chapter 15 about lost things.
Yes.
We have the parable of the Good Samaritan, I believe is in chapter 10. One of the interesting things in the Gospel of Luke is an emphasis on food and meals. There's a whole fellowship thing. And sometimes people will say, well, in the book of Luke, Jesus is either on his way to a meal, He's at a meal or he's leaving a meal. And food is in almost every single chapter of this book. They're talking about different things, and the community relationship is important to that. Beautiful stories after Jesus is raised from the dead. We have the wonderful story of the walk to Emmaus, and how they tell the gospel story to Jesus. He's walking with them. They don't realize it, and they say, "Are you the only person in Jerusalem who doesn't know what happened?" And then they recite the gospel story, and they're sad when they do this. And the reason they're sad is they come to the end of the story and they say, "But him they did not see." And then they recognize Jesus at the breaking of the bread, and they said, "Didn't our hearts burn within us when he told us this in the way, when he explained the scriptures to us?" Oh, I love the book of Luke. There's so many wonderful stories. It's a wonderful, wonderful addition to the canon.
And finally, we come to probably the favorite gospel of a lot of Christians,
a lot of people.
The Gospel of John. Some people have called the beloved gospel.
Right.
What is interesting about this gospel? Why is that so much loved?
John is unique. The other three gospels we've said are Synoptic Gospels, and they tell the story of Jesus in very similar ways. The Gospel of John is structured very differently. We said we go to the beginning of the gospel to kind of get an idea of where he's headed.
Yes.
Well, where Matthew begins with the birth of Jesus, actually the genealogy of Jesus and the birth of Jesus, and Mark begins with John the Baptist and the story of how Jesus is baptized. Luke begins with the story of Jesus and how he is especially connected with the poor and with women and the people who are on the margins. The Gospel of John begins with eternity. And it says, "In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God." He later says, "The Word became flesh." It's like a poem here at the very beginning. And it reaches all the way back to eternity. It says, when creation happened, the Word was already there. So he gives this very strong, high Christology of Jesus as the divine Son of God, who will, Jesus walks through this gospel with so much power. It's just amazing, as you see the story.
Now, the three Gospels that we have mentioned before, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, they were probably written. They are very similar, and it's possible they were written more or less in the same time period. Yeah. But John is very different, and probably John was the one written the latest.
Yeah, probably around 90 95 AD. John is an old man, and he's probably still in Ephesus when he writes this. When he goes to Patmos, he writes Revelation, and Revelation's Greek reads very differently than the Gospel of John. So, the smoothness of it, maybe he had some people.
Do you think that John was trying to provide something that was lacking, and that's why he decided to write? What was that?
Well, one of the very interesting things about the Gospel of John is the way when he tells stories, he tells his stories much more time, much more longer stories, not a little clip of a miracle story and a saying of Jesus. It's a long discourse, and he has this beautiful way of focusing attention in on just two people. Some of the most memorable experiences you have, like Nicodemus comes to him by night. I mean, the most favorite text in the Bible, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life," was spoken to one man at night, maybe somewhere in the Mount of Olives.
So you have these interviews.
Yeah, these interviews. The woman at the well.
Yes.
And when he heals people, that there's just this focus in just on that, and that makes the book very, very personal. While John, you get an idea of where he's going from the beginning. He actually, at the end of the book, tells you why he wrote it. He said, "This is written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name." The book is actually organized around miracles of Jesus that are called signs. And there's probably 7 of these, starting with the wine, the water turned to wine in Cana. And then following, there are other of these miracles. He heals a man in Bethsaida. He heals a blind man in Jerusalem. And he raises Lazarus from the dead. And these signs are the signs of his power, the signs of his messiahship. The Gospel of John is also filled with irony. one of the sharp ironies is around that story of Lazarus, where the religious leaders decide that they're going to not only kill Jesus, but they're going to kill Lazarus, because people will believe in Jesus because Lazarus was raised from the dead. And you look at that and you say, you know, what's wrong with this picture? You really think that you can stop a man who can raise the dead by killing him?
And it's kind of funny, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of seems like that's what they want to do, but of course they don't succeed. And the book ends with these wonderful stories about the disciples meeting Jesus at Galilee and how he has a message for them. And while the beloved disciple, some got the idea he would live until Jesus comes, he reminds them, no, he didn't say that I would live until Jesus comes. He just said, if it was my will, he would remain until I come. So, yeah, the Gospel of John, wonderful, wonderful gospel, rich in truth.
So, Tom, we have gone through all the Gospels, and they focus a lot on the death of Jesus and his ministry, very little on his personal life. But there is this question that, did Jesus have a wife? Did he have children? What do we know about that?
Okay, the quick answer to that is no. He had
Okay.
no wife, no children. Okay, our four Gospels do not mention anything like that.
Yes.
Jesus says on his ministry, and while they were women who were part of his group, no reference to this. So where in the world do people get this idea? Well, recently a small fragment of a text in Coptic, which is not what the New Testament was written in, it comes from a much later period, probably from the 4th century AD. There's a little thing where it's a Gnostic text. We've talked about the Gnostics before, so people can check that program. But a Gnostic text that references Jesus' wife. And so then people all get this idea, oh, Jesus had a wife, Jesus had a wife. Really, from just one little fragment, this a very small little thing, comes from the 4th century and not recorded in any of the Gospels that come from the 1st century at all. You think Jesus had a wife? That doesn't make any sense at all to take that kind of a position. And even in Gnostic belief, this term of a wife could even be kind of metaphorical, spiritual, and since they didn't have so much tendencies towards material things, you can't even be sure without more context exactly what it means. So it's very, very speculative and not founded in any good facts at all to suggest Jesus had a wife.
What we have in the Bible, then, we will say that the wife of Jesus is the church, and
well, that's different.
It's a very different thing, right?
And when Paul says that we have the right to go around with a wife, you think that he would have referred to, and Jesus had a wife, if Jesus had had one. So that Paul stays silent on the matter is strong evidence against him.